Welcome to the Mold Matters Podcast. Whether you are looking for help recovering from mold illness or just want to learn more about creating a safe environment for your family, this podcast is the place for you.
All right, welcome to Mold Matters Podcast with Jeremy Evans and Mike Adams. We're coming to you from 3 different places in the United States today. Kind of a unique scenario. Mike had to go. Where are you, Mike, again?
I'm in beautiful, not quite sunny Seattle.
Yeah. Is it pretty rainy there?
Yeah. It's real rainy. Yeah.
Yeah. And and I'm coming from Layton, Utah, and Dr. Pompa, our guest, is out in Park City. Are you in Park City today, Dr. Pompa?
I am. I was going to say, usually I'm the one doing something like this from somewhere.
Yeah.
But I am here in Park City, Utah.
Nice. We actually announced that we were going to have you on the show last podcast, so we'll do some introductions here. But just a reminder for our listeners, we are a podcast dedicated to pretty much all things mold. We are in the remediation industry, and so particularly Mike has treated thousands upon thousands of homes. We've combined on thousands of mold inspections together. Though not health practitioners, I mean, you can't help but confront health challenges and people that are struggling when you do that many mold treatments and mold inspections. And so, and actually, Mike, you and I have said this many times. We do a lot of treatments. Some of them are just, people call us from Google. Sometimes people, have a real estate transaction where the inspector found mold, they call us. And then there's a good chunk of our business, probably the largest chunk of our business, are those who are struggling with mold toxicity, mold-related illnesses. And far and away, that is our most satisfying part of our work. Mine for sure. Yeah. And I think from when we talked the other day. I mean, it's just, everyone likes helping people, and that's where we get our fix, Like we said
I told somebody the other day about, in fact, I was trading him. I had to remediate homes, and I said nothing fires me up more than to try to fix a home that has a sick child. That's what charges me.
Yeah, totally. So, as much as we love that, we've always acknowledged we're not health professionals, and so what we're doing to rectify that today is we're inviting one of the great health professionals who's been involved with healing people, including himself, which I'd like you to share, Dr. Pompa, from mold-related illnesses. And we just got to know you, Dr. Pompa, in the last few months, and it's been an awesome friendship and partnership and learning from you. And we've even treated your house a couple times.
Oh, yeah. Once after I had a water line break and, flooded my house. Anyway, so thank you.
Yeah.
And then I had a suspicious wall in my house that had a smell, and treated it and never came back. So appreciate that. But look, I mean, this whole thing, I'm blessed now. I mean, I have a big social media following, but I train doctors around the country to do what I do. All of that information, came out of my own battle. And, I mean, when I deal with people who have what I reference or call neurotoxic illness, which mold illness fits under that category, there's typically a perfect storm of toxins, meaning, if you remember the movie with George Clooney, right? The Perfect Storm. You guys old enough to remember that movie?
Yeah. Well, I certainly am.
This is the 80s. I don't know. But it was a great movie. They talked about how these 3 storms come together and cause a catastrophic storm that, decimates, people's lives. Well, that's exactly what I see when I'm dealing with someone with an unexplainable illness. I sniff out the perfect storm. Many cases, mold is one of the storms. Even if in my case, I had high mercury levels that accumulated in my brain. And I got that from amalgam fillings, which is 50% mercury. I got it because I wore contact lenses in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. That actually the saline solution had thimerosal, which is a mercury derivative, going directly into my brain. My father loved methylate, which is mercury. So, I mean, I had a lot of sources, but the bottom line is that was my initiator, because my sickness unknowingly started after I got 2 amalgam fillings, these silver fillings removed. However, I was also living in a house with a low-grade mold, which I could have been there another 10 years and maybe not be affected. But when I hit that battle, all of a sudden then the mold became an issue. So like so many of the people that I deal with, right? And then I realized I was mold sensitive. Even after I got my life back, I'd be feeling normal and I'd go to a hotel and not sleep all night and have anxiety because the HVAC system had mold, right? So I realized at one point that I now was reacting to mold. Now I'm far less reactive. However, there are certain strains that will get me to this day. So when I'm dealing with clients around the country and, my doctors that I'm training, getting rid of the source is like the first step to getting somebody well. Identifying the upstream root causes is key, which unfortunately, even in my world of functional medicine, so many people, doctors, practitioners don't do. They're just loading up people with supplements and expensive tests. And meanwhile, someone's still living in a mold exposure, not knowing it, because you typically don't see it. And if you live there, you don't smell it. And it's not like water's pouring through the ceiling. Maybe a leak happened years ago and it just never got remediated correctly. And now there's mold there producing a biotoxin that's making you sick. You don't know. Anyways, part of that was, my story. And again, everything I teach on how to identify this as a potential source and then get rid of it in the body appropriately at the cellular level, has become what I do and what I teach. But I'll tell you, and I'll just say this, I literally was looking for a testimony from one of my doctors. I train doctors. I use something called Voxer. It's kind of like walkie-talkie back and forth. And because it was last week, it kind of got buried and I can't pull it up, or at least I don't know how to pull it up. But I wanted to play it because it was one of my doctors. She used Pure Maintenance, your fog, your patented fog that you have. And it transformed her in a week. I mean, her joint pain went away. All her breathing and tightness, and she was sleeping through the nights. She left this long Voxer, which is meaning that all the doctors that I train, there's like 70 of us on there. She left that Voxer. And then after she left that, then some of the docs started telling some of the patient stories, and I have to say it was such a blessing meeting you all, because mold is a problem, because we can get rid of a filling in someone's mouth. We can look and identify hidden infections, root canals, etc. But mold is a problem because it was super expensive to remediate. So much after people would spend $30,000, $50,000, their remediation wouldn't work, and they still couldn't go in their house. Finding you all is a blessing. But anyways, that's my story, and that's how we all came together.
Yeah.
Dr. Pompa, you brought up something that kind of keyed me into. I wanted you to comment on it, but you said a lot of times the patient can't even see the mold, and that's been my and Jeremy's experience. Is a customer will have a leak and they'll see, okay, I've got a leak and I've got mold forming, for an example, on this basement wall. But the fact of the matter is that entire house is full of mold, and just by removing just that wall is not going to take care of the problem.
And then there's another problem, because the people that I deal with, right, that have bizarre and unexplainable symptoms and illnesses, right, they are not reacting to the mold spore. The spore can cause allergies, breathing problems. Mm-hmm. Very typical, which most doctors would associate with a mold problem. Mm-hmm. They're not reacting to that. They're reacting to the biotoxin, aka mycotoxin. That means It's a toxin that's produced by the mold spore. Okay, and that's through the home. So if you have a problem in your basement, you share the air regardless throughout your home. And that biotoxin is 400 to 1,000 angstroms. Okay, that means it's super small. And that means it goes everywhere in the house. The problem is that's the thing that activates the immune system and drives weight loss resistance, brain fog, of course, massive fatigue, all the symptoms that we see, the anxiety, and, all of that is driven by the biotoxin itself. So not the spore. So,
Right.
That's where your product's been a godsend as well, because it treats the whole house, not just, the mold's gone out of that wall.
Right.
Yeah. So Mike has talked about when we treat a home, we basically denature the mold and the mold spore. Thus, that spore is not emitting any more mycotoxins. So we'll typically air out a house really well afterwards, or have the customer do that, airing out any of those VOCs. But is that a proper way to think about it? That you really, if you really take care of the mold and the mold spores, then you don't have to worry about the mycotoxins. Or, what we do, are we killing the mycotoxin as well? Or both?
I would say this. I would say for the average person, not an issue. But once you react to this biotoxin, you become hyper sensitive to the biotoxin. I've had people that spent all this money on remediating their home, and every time they would sit on their couch, they would get sick, or certain things that hold the biotoxin. So now you become hypersensitive to the biotoxin itself.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we had always used to oxidize the biotoxin is hydrogen peroxide.
Mm-hmm.
Hydrogen peroxide is an oxidative element, and it would obviously, it has some ability to kill mold, but really one of the powerful parts about it is it could oxidize the biotoxin itself, neutralize, if you will. But the problem with, you can't dump hydrogen peroxide on certain things. You can't get it to places in your house. You can't cover your whole home.
You can't
in hydrogen peroxide. And part of your formula, a patented formula, takes hydrogen peroxide and some other things, and puts it into a nanoparticle, that penetrates these areas where we have to neutralize, not only kill the mycotoxin, but also neutralize the biotoxin.
Yeah. So
I'm sorry, Jared, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to back up. I wanted to ask some follow-up questions, but if yours is related, go for it.
It's not crazy related, but a common denominator we see all the time when we do inspections and talk to customers, Dr. Pompa, is Lyme's disease. Can you just touch on that, the correlation, or the why that is such a common denominator with high mold load in homes?
Well, and can I interject real quick, Mike?
Yeah.
Along that line, you talk about these unexplainable illnesses. So we often see, we talked about this a couple episodes ago. I mean, there's MS, there's
chronic fatigue.
I mean, there's a handful of these ones. Yeah. Fibromyalgia. That's what I was thinking of. There's a handful of these that people just have a real problem trying to figure out. And oftentimes when I show up to a house, they have mold and they have some of these other things that are kind of category. They're lumped into that category of like, doctors don't know what to do with me. Could you touch on maybe, how mold, is mold part of a lot of these?
That's the perfect storm, right? So I train my docs to look at 3 areas that are missed, and typically, in some aspect, make up the perfect storm.
Mm-hmm.
Mold, hidden infections, which Lyme can be a part of, something called cavitations, which are infections in the jaw where teeth are extracted, root canals, right, drive hidden infections. And then the other one, so it's mold, hidden infections, and heavy metals.
Mm-hmm.
Typically they're missed, and they're definitely detoxed incorrectly out of the body. So those 3. And now I would argue that then trapped emotions and emotional trauma can be one of the storms as well.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you may have been adapting to that, but when you add one more storm, this mold exposure, now it sends your bucket overflowing. and now your body doesn't adapt, and now you end up with the diagnosis of fibromyalgia or whatever name they slap on it. But the point is it's a combination of these stressors that come together and trigger genes, turn on genes, and people don't understand that it was these three stressors that came together. And one of them could be the emotional traumas, right? Added to the mold exposure and added to the heavy metals that you were accumulating throughout your life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Lyme disease, to answer your question, Mike, fits into that as well. We know now that testing has gotten better, that 90% of certain populations have Lyme. And I do a lot of testing.
Wow.
But why aren't they all sick? Should be the question. Well, the same with Epstein-Barr. You know, out of the three of us, I promise you, two of us have Epstein-Barr, right? Well, why aren't we sick? Well, because they're opportunistic, whether it be Lyme, Epstein-Barr, cytomegalovirus, Candida albicans. So these things are opportunistic pathogens that once you're now in a mold exposure, all of a sudden it lowers your immunity, and now Lyme rears its ugly head and becomes uncontrollable. Now it's part of the perfect storm. Now it's something we have to deal with as well as the mold. Oh, and heavy metals. According to Dr. Klinghardt and others, and I can tell you my own clinical experience, now, again, Lyme can hide in and around specific heavy metals to hide from the immune system. So now you have to deal with the heavy metals. You can't just deal with the Lyme. And if mold's a player, you have to deal with it. The mistake practitioners make is they think it's just one thing. It's not. So I always say, look, that root canal in your mouth may not be why you got sick. Now you won't get well unless you deal with that hidden infection there. It's still keeping your immune system distracted.
Interesting.
Wow.
So
Yeah, that's great. That's a better explanation than I have ever heard in 15 years of doing this.
yeah, we actually kind of explained that in less scientific terms a couple episodes ago, but yeah. So, I think of people who, because here's what I think, Dr. Pompa, when I'm in lots of people's homes, I mean, there is a contingency of people out there who are very in tune with the natural medicine world. They're very in tune with, how mold can affect their bodies, and we treat those people. But there's another big percentage that they're not in touch with that scene at all. And I go in there and I really highly suspect that mold is causing some of their ailments in their life, just because they have a lot of mold. And then, I start interviewing them and hearing about all these symptoms. And, in my, again, I'm not a health practitioner, but just in my experience, that seems like something's going on there.
Well, look, there's a simple test to start. You can go to VCS, like Victor, Cat, Sam, VCStest.com. Mm-hmm. Take the test. There's a 10% inaccuracy there, one way or the other, meaning false negative, false positive, but it's a great place to start. And it tests for biotoxic illness. Remember, it's not testing for a mold allergy, because I'm not concerned about mold allergies. People have mold allergies, and I'm not saying it's a nice thing, but I'm talking about biotoxic illness, which are these things that we're talking about. But that is a great, matter of fact, it gives you a positive or negative biotoxic illness. That's the score it's giving you. All of my doctors have these in their office, and it's a handheld unit. It's a little more accurate than the online unit, but the online unit costs you a $10 donation. So VCStest.com. But look, if it walks like a duck or waddles like one, quacks like one, it just might be a duck, meaning if your energy's low, you have brain fog, your sleep's off, you're starting to gain weight, you don't know why, even you're exercising and you're still gaining weight, you're eating better, you're still gaining, okay, this could be a mold issue or a biotoxic issue.
So those are the most common symptoms of biotoxic illness, those ones you just listed off.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's a little more complicated than that. It's oftentimes you get some bizarre things like frequent urination. Then you get things like bizarre sound sensitivities. I mean, I have another whole list of symptoms, but yeah, those four that I mentioned are typically where people start.
Okay, so they can.
Doctor,
Go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, Jerry. I was just saying, Dr. Pompa, do you think, by and large, this is growing? This is growing as a problem in the nation. I mean, this is getting bigger and bigger.
It is because the way we build homes, right, for efficiency and to save electric bill, we build homes very tight, tighter than ever. Well, why is that a problem? Because when a home can't breathe, it's a bad thing for trapping humidity and moisture. Oh, and then we put up drywall, which just happens to contain the perfect food for mold called cellulose.
Right.
So that paper on the drywall is now the food. So all you do is add water. The spores are always there. You guys know this, right? You could test every house anywhere, and you will find mold spores. So the mold is there. All we have to do is add water to a fuel source, which just happens to be the drywall. Oh, and then we have a house that traps airflow. So now we don't have the ability to dry it behind the wall. Now we have a new problem.
Yeah. In fact, that's interesting you should bring that up. I'm here in Seattle, and I was just training a technician up here to inspect a home. And this home has mold everywhere. Of course, they're in Seattle. But the technician asked me, where is the water coming from? And I said, all you need is 60% humidity, and you're going to have a perfect situation for mold to grow. And once it gets kind of a little bit out of control, the problem becomes exponential. And now you got mold growing and sporing and finding other places to grow and spore, and it gets out of control in a hurry in a home.
By the way, that's why most basements have mold. Your basement may have never leaked, but if you measure your humidity in your basement, if it's above 50 consistently, you have a mold problem there.
Yeah.
It's like, and so humidity is a problem. I mean, that's why, Florida, I couldn't go to Florida when I was sick because I'd pick up minor amounts of biotoxins would make me sick. And so many of the HVAC systems, meaning the air conditioning, heating units, but in that case, air conditioning units had mold. The coil oftentimes has mold because it clicks on and it cools everything down, and then it shuts off. The fan shuts off. That's why you should always run your fan continually. And then moisture builds up on the coil because of the temperature difference. And then guess what? Mold keeps forming. So you're blowing mold throughout the building. Right? So that's a problem. HVAC systems are a problem. Yeah. And oftentimes HVAC systems have ductwork that has gaps. And now you have temperature difference, hot and cold. Mm-hmm. And guess what? Where there's hot and cold is moisture. Think about a glass, right? You have a glass of cold water in a hot, humid day. All the moisture forms on the outside. Well, that condensation is happening up in your attic. If you have a gap. So one of the things I always tell people is make sure every one of your ductwork, make sure that they're all sealed appropriately. Make sure you run your fan consistently. Make sure that your coil gets cleaned periodically and your ductwork, just to keep the mold off of that. So a lot of mold is from the HVAC systems. To go back to your question, Mike, that this is a modern day problem. If you go to Europe and Italy, these places don't even have HVAC. They rely on like normal air exchange, cross ventilation. Mold's not an issue. Yeah. But when we seal homes, when we have HVAC units that create condensation, we've got an issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so kind of back to your, was it VTS test, or what was it again? VCS?
It stands for Visual Contrast Sensitivity
VCS.
Test. So VCStest.com
okay.
is where you can go.
And because surprisingly, I forgot the acronym, but I actually took this a couple weeks ago because I listened to one of your other podcasts where you mentioned it, and I was like, I'm just going to see, I'm in moldy homes all the time, and I thought, and I try to use respirators when I need to and that kind of thing. But I was like, I don't have any symptoms, but like you said, it's $10, a $10 donation. Mm-hmm. And so I took it, and it came back, negative, saying I didn't have it. But
surprisingly, in the medical world, negative is good.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think back to, how does someone know, if maybe mold is an issue? You're saying we've got this little easy online thing. I think it took me 10 minutes, if I remember right.
Yep.
that's one way to kind of easily say, okay, this might be a thing. And then of course the symptoms that you mentioned and some of the other ones. Now with mold toxicity, with a again, the mycotoxin aspect of things, there's sick building syndrome or some of these things where I feel worse when I'm inside the house, but when I'm on vacation, I'm fine. Can that also be a toxic, mold toxicity, or is that more akin to allergenic response when it's just when I'm in the house?
Well, it could be both, right? But I still always ask that question. How do you feel when you leave that environment, right? Oh, God, I feel so much better, right? Or, and then I come home and it's, to your point, it could be some type of other allergy, but oftentimes it's an answer,
Dr. Pompa, over the years, I've talked to other practitioners, and I've studied a lot. They all seem to center around the idea that there's about 27% of the population that has this abnormality or gene that doesn't signal that that's a mold toxin and your body needs to get rid of it. Am I close on that?
I think it's 24%. Not that you were darn close, but that came out of Richie Shoemaker's work, and at that time when his book came out, Surviving Mold, we were all running the blood work. And part of that blood work was HLA-DR test, which is looking at genotyping. And we were able to look at a large sample of people. And, we just didn't find that to correlate that he found. I would acknowledge that genetics play a role in who's sensitive and who's not. But, it's more than genetics. I think when we look at this perfect storm, and again, this is my clinical knowledge talking and experience, it's typically the person who gets sick in the house is typically the person who is already challenged, meaning that their bucket was already close to being full, and then this one spills it over. So it's the person who already had high lead levels, or the person who already had, mouthful of different infections, the person who already had a lot of emotional stress, right? So, and then bam, they're the ones that get sick. I find that to be more correlated. Now, again, I would still recognize that, genetics and your ability to get rid of a biotoxin plays a role. But, everyone's hung on to those percentages. I just don't know, how accurate that is. And I don't want to take away from Shoemaker's work and his, but I don't know. Everyone wants it to be as simple as a gene. It's just not.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know.
That clears up a lot of things for me. Yeah. Because we see a lot of people and it's a real problem, and it sure seems like it's more than just 25% of the people that call us have this, this illness,
Yeah.
Yep. So one of the other problems with mold that we deal with, right? I just had this conversation with my sister today. I was concerned because they have this water leak and she has a mold issue in this house. And I was visiting my other sister in Florida, and her husband said, since Diane, that's my sister that I was speaking to this morning, moved into that house, she's been sick. I think, it's that mold issue that's downstairs. Her husband's been slow to fix it. And so, I called my sister this morning and I'm having the conversation. Diane, did you fix that? Well, we stopped the leak, okay, well, that's great. But he hasn't fixed the mold. And, it's because he really doesn't believe it's a problem because he doesn't feel anything. He's lived in this house. He feels fine, and that's a problem, because, her husband's really a healthy guy. He doesn't feel anything. So there's now, mold's not a problem. There's so many people that just don't believe mold. Yeah. And it's almost like that's like not believing in gravity. You don't believe mold's an illness or it causes an illness, right? But there's that beat on the street that real estate people started, practitioners, because insurance companies didn't want to pay for this stuff, people injured by mold. So therefore, it didn't exist. That's just in their head. It's all hogwash. So mold got this reputation. It doesn't exist. Mold illness doesn't exist. It's not real. This and that. And that still lives on, believe it or not.
I know it. We see it so often. And you're right. It's always I feel so bad for typically it's the mom in the family
Yep.
that is sick, and the husband just does not buy into it at all. And the problem gets worse and worse and worse. And I've seen it break up marriages. I've seen all kinds of horrible things from, just from the effect of mold.
Me too. I in my book that I'm writing right now, I talk about the three evils, these things that are missed, right? Hidden infections, in biblical times they talk about pestilence, how it decimates lives. And, I believe that's part of it. And then mercury, oddly, is called the god of deception. And if you look at where the mercury sources are, vaccines, still 25 micrograms in a flu shot, right? It's like, so that's deception, right? And you look at, like I said, contact lens fluid. It's out now that for how many years people are poisoned. There's so many sources of mercury that we've been deceived. So God of deception makes sense. And then mold. If you look at Leviticus 14,
right? Yeah,
it's so devastating that God was specific with Israel exactly what to do when you see this mold. And if it does this, do this. If it, if that doesn't work and it comes back, basically get out of the house.
Right.
Take everything and put it into a place called unclean. Showing how devastating the biotoxin is for mold. Right, and it's like, so it's no different today. There's some homes that are literally, tear downs. I mean, just like, good luck. Until your product, I'm telling you, it's been a godsend because so many people have had to leave their homes, just like Leviticus 14. But, now have been able to stay in their homes, because, so anyways, it's an evil thing. Mold to me is the most evil of all. I watched lives just absolutely get decimated, and it's so sad. And then, in wake of mold illness, you end up with chemical sensitivity. Now you're labeled as a lunatic. That was me. So then I became hypersensitive to perfume, fragrances, and I couldn't even live my life. I couldn't leave my safe haven, but I'm good now, but I spent many years thinking, am I just crazy? So that's the other problem with mold.
I've had a number of husbands over the years pull me to the side during a bid or an inspection and tell me, I think my wife is nuts.
Yeah.
And, it took me a while to catch on to what was going on. And no, your wife is not nuts. Your wife is sick.
Yeah.
And you know what? Honestly, in his mind, the only reason you were saying that is because you wanted to sell your service.
Yeah,
that's
right.
That's the saddest part. And you're on the other side of that conversation going, yeah, I know you're thinking this right now. So you might as well just state it. Just be like, look, I know you're thinking this right now, but, I'm telling you the truth that this is, absolutely affecting your wife. So sad. So sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to, so Dr. Pompa, someone gets sick. We're only going to go another 7 or 8 minutes here, but someone gets sick from mold. I know part of your program, entails from what you've told me and what I've read, it's a cell detox on the cellular level, right?
Yep.
So I know we can't explain in great detail how someone heals from this stuff, but maybe you could, so someone is toxic, gets mold toxicity. How do they begin the journey? What does it look like?
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole nother show, right?
Yeah.
But,
is that too much to come in 3 or 4
I mean,
minutes?
it has to be done correctly. I did a great webinar, and if you watch the webinar, it will give it a better answer than I could in 2 seconds here.
Yeah,
but,
we'll post that on our podcast.
Yeah, exactly. If you just go to Pompa Solution, my last name, Pompa Solutions.com, you can watch the webinar.
Okay.
But, I've coached for years people through the process. And now what I have is a whole online university that, teaches what to do and how to do it. Basically what I teach doctors. But ultimately, real detox has to be at the cellular level. Many people do colon cleanses. Now with mold, one of the things that was made popular was using a binder in the gut to grab the biocomplex which holds mold. That's still part of my process. Now, but it's only part. You have to upregulate the cellular detox pathways that get rid of these toxins, and then have another binder chelator outside the cell waiting to grab those and pull them all the way out of the body. So it's a process that I've taught for over 15 years. It works. It works. And again, you can do all the liver cleanses, colon cleanses, this cleanse, that cleanse, but ultimately you have to go to the cell, upregulate its function, and I have a process to do that, and make sure that these toxins leave the body using real chelators and binders. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's simplifying what I've taught for years.
Yeah. And you basically figured out this process, experimenting on your own health, right?
Everything I teach today came out of that battle. And I always say that, look, this whole thing, every bit of it chose me. When I was in my illness, right, where I was coming out of my mind with anxiety and sleeplessness, and I could barely work anymore. We had 2 young boys at that time. We have 5 kids now, but I couldn't even handle a crying kid, let alone be the normal father or husband I needed to be. But my wife, and her stress of the whole situation, God literally gave her, a word, and I'm sure her desperate moment, that not only am I going to heal him, but I'm going to use him to take a message to the world. And that's a true story. Yeah. And she would remind me of that, what God spoke to her heart. And when I was sick, I'd get very angry because my response to her was, I can't even get myself well. It's like, what are you talking about? Yeah. Right? It's like, but she literally, God gave her the vision of what he was doing. Maybe her only mistake was she shouldn't have shared it with me until later. But that's a true story, and so I can't take credit for any bit of the information that I teach. Honestly, I'm not smart enough to come up with it, but
that it's really interesting to me, Dr. Pompa, because we say the same thing about our company. Is we didn't build this thing, We really feel like it was a blessing from heaven. Like you said, we're not this smart either.
Yeah.
It was put before us, and we ran with it.
And Mike, I was just remembering when you shared the other podcasts a couple ago, how you suspect nowadays that your mom probably died from, at least mold was a big part of her
I'm absolutely positive. Because and it was long before I was even in doing this. Yeah.
Yeah. We're waxing a little spiritual here, which is totally fine. But I agree with this sentiment that a lot of our times our trials are what turn out to be the gifts that we can use. How many people are you helping now, Dr. Pompa, saving them the years that you had to go through with the trial and error? And now Mike, fittingly, if your mom really did pass away from a life of suffering because of living in all those moldy homes for most of her life, and now here you are, fittingly, treating tons of people's homes who struggle or who deal with mold illness and mold problems. So I think there's something to that, some divine symmetry. And anyways, I think we ought to wrap it up. I'm really grateful for you coming on here, Dr. Pompa.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. People need to share the show because I promise you, people listening, they know someone in their small circle that has those symptoms, and it could be mold. So share the show, please.
Yeah, and we really appreciate your friendship, and we'll post some of those websites that you mentioned. We'll post that with the podcast so people can access that. Because really, here's something I'll mention real quick. We'll often treat a home, and I've heard this from other health practitioners. Treating the home someone will notice a significant difference, usually immediately, but sometimes, especially those that aren't really, you mentioned some of the cellular detox that you teach. Some people, if they're not doing some kind of regime to help their body detox, some binders and some of these other things, they don't feel better necessarily, or at least not that much. At least not for a while, or
it's going to take. Yeah, it's just the beginning of the journey, really.
By the way, exactly. Some people, when you get amalgam fillings out, feel better immediately, and they'll tell you their testimony. And then I always say, well, there's a honeymoon phase. to 9 months down the road, these symptoms start again, right? Some people don't feel better at all after they get removed, right? No different with getting out of a moldy home situation. You might feel better right away, and then there's a honeymoon period, and then you realize, oh, I still have this, this, and this. You've got to get it out of your body appropriately, just like the health.
Yeah. And I think that's a valid point, because I liked how you brought up earlier that, there's most likely multiple things at play. And Mike and I aren't crazy enough to believe that everyone's unexplained illnesses are mold. We don't assert that at all. But we often, like I said earlier, we often suspect if there is a moldy home, we suspect mold could be part of it. And so
absolutely,
it's good to know that, I like, even if someone, we do a thorough treatment and we do some after testing, and we're like, this place is pretty darn clean from a mold perspective. At least that person can then check that box off and say, okay, I can feel better about my mold scenario. Let me kind of start tackling some of these other, things, and it's part of that journey, I guess is what I'm saying.
By the way, that's exactly right. I tell, if I'm working with a client, and I train my doctors the same, you have to check off all these upstream causative factors. So if we suspect or even think mold's an issue, I want them to fog their home. Mm-hmm. And, it's just part of the process. So you have to roll it out. It's part of the process. So well said.
Yeah. Well, great. Thanks, Dr. Pompa. Thanks, Mike, for tuning in from Seattle. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, okay.
And look forward to our next meeting. And this was the Mold Matters podcast with Dr. Pompa, Mike Adams, Jeremy Evans. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Take care.
See ya.